Hello once again, everybody, and thank you for joining me in the Bettor's Box. It's BangTheBook.com's MLB betting podcast for Thursday, July 11th. I am your host, Adam Burke. This and every edition of the Bettor's Box presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB and the number 200 is that promo code. 100% deposit match bonus up to $500 for the sportsbook. 100% deposit match bonus up to $500 for the live casino at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. Monday, Thursday format here with the Bettor's Box. As you know, we'll be back on the air again after the weekend here on Monday with a new edition of the Monday Mailbag. So at Skating Tripods on Twitter or Adam at BangTheBook.com via email if you want to send me those questions. Also, Adam at BangTheBook.com via email if you want to sign up for the notes for the Bettor's Box. We'll be sending those out here for today's show later on this evening. So, again, Adam at BangTheBook.com via email to get on that mailing list for the notes for the show. My MLB picks and tips piece is updated with the one game here for tonight. That is the Astros taking on the Rangers. Back to the full card tomorrow on Friday. NFL season win totals have been posted over at the website. We'll have college football stuff coming soon as well. We do have a little bit of college football content already. Aram Tollegian with a look at Clemson, with a look at Michigan. A couple of very good write-ups there. I handicapped the new coaches for the Power 5 and the Group of 5, wrote up my home field advantage analysis for the upcoming season, and I've been working on my power ratings here this week with the All-Star break. Got 3 conferences done so far, hoping to get 2 or 3 more here done today, then hoping to get those posted for you early next week, probably Monday or Tuesday. We'll start doing some college football shows as well to get you ready for that upcoming season because, you know what? It's going to be here before we know it. So should have some power ratings up for you next week, and then also start doing some special edition podcasts. Should have a special edition podcast next Thursday for the Open Championship with Brian Blessing as well. So that'll give you something to look forward to with that. All right, so just going to talk about a lot of different things here as we get ready for the second half, which begins tonight for 2 teams, tomorrow for 28 other teams. First and foremost, post-All-Star break betting. Something I wanted to make sure that I touched on here. I talked about keeping things very light going into the All-Star break. Of course, on Saturday, had one of our worst days of the season, as luck would have it. But I think you should tread lightly coming out of the All-Star break as well. Some of these guys have not thought about baseball at all for the last few days. They've gone on vacations. They've spent time with their families, so on and so forth. But by and large, the reason why I tread very lightly coming out of the All-Star break is that a lot of times you get pitchers on very extended layoffs. They won't have pitched for 7, 8, maybe 9 days. And when you get around to the back of the rotation guys, the 4th and 5th starters, it's almost kind of like early season, regular season baseball in late March, early April, where those guys may not have pitched in 12, 13, maybe even 14 days. In some cases, depending on how off days shook out, if they were skipped coming into the break, something like that. Also, with the 10-day disabled list, you've got some roster manipulation going on there with, some pitchers going on the DL, miss that 10 days, come back 3 or 4 days after the break. You've got some pitchers that, like Framber Valdez, who's going tonight for the Astros, went down to the minor leagues, pitched on a regular turn. He's on his regular day today against Lance Lynn, pitching for the first time in a week. So you do have situations like that where, some pitchers may be on closer to a regular turn. Others may be on a much longer layoff. So you got to tread very lightly with those situations because I don't really know what they mean necessarily. I know some guys like to go every 5 days. Corey Kluber, for example, never wanted to skip a start, never wanted the Indians to go to a 6-man rotation, even though they had the depth to do it, because he wanted to pitch every 5 days. Some guys don't mind the extended layoff. Some guys maybe like 2 weeks off to work on some things, get healthy with that arm, something like that. We don't really know. I think it's a great unknown when you've got a potential unlevel playing field with a starter on a regular turn versus a guy that's not, something like that. So I tread very lightly for the most part coming out of the All-Star break. Do have a pick in tonight's game, but on the whole, not going to see a whole lot of volume from me the first and really the second time through these rotations as teams try to get all their stuff squared away. Now, that being said, we're 20 days away from the trade deadline. And there is no waiver trade deadline anymore, where we used to see deals completed over the course of the month of August. A player would clear waivers. Teams would decide, what personnel they wanted to move to claim that player off of waivers. We don't have that anymore. So all trades have to happen by July 31st this year, which means a lot of players are going to be on the move over the next 20 days. That creates a very interesting situation for a lot of teams. If you're a team like the San Francisco Giants, for example, Madison Bumgarner is going to go. Will Smith's going to go. Any position player rental that's worth anything is probably going to go. Other bullpen pieces could be on the move. Those are very uncertain times for teams. It's a very difficult thing. It's also the end of an era in San Francisco with Bruce Bochy retiring at the end of the season. So a situation like that in particular in San Francisco, a lot of guys on pins and needles. There's a lot of anxiety in that clubhouse. I don't know how teams deal with that. Some teams may rally together and say, you know what, boys, it's be the last time we're going to be together. Let's make these 3 weeks as good as we possibly can. Other teams may kind of sit back and be like, I don't know where my friends are going. These players that are on the trade block, they have to uproot families. They've got kids enrolled in school for the upcoming school year. Their kids have friends. Their wives have friends. They're entrenched in the community doing philanthropic things, or, maybe they have restaurants that they frequent, something like that. You have to up and move your life with one phone call and then try to get all settled in, try to get everything figured out while you're also pitching in the spotlight. And if you get traded to a team, odds are that team is probably in the hunt. So all of a sudden you go from maybe a situation like the Giants, who are, 25 games off the pace in the West, to being right in the playoff hunt, being right in a pennant race. And of course, when you talk about trades, teams are moving players up the ranks. They're moving players up the system. Maybe they're plugging in the new guys that they acquired, but a lot of times they're going to get, future pieces, single A, double A players. So they're moving guys up from triple A, youngsters making big league debuts. So not only is it a tough learning curve for them, but also the opposition has to learn about these guys, go through the scouting reports, figure out how to pitch this prospect that just got called up, or some of these guys off the bench that are getting more playing time, something like that. So these next 20 days are very, very unique when it comes to Major League Baseball. I think it can be very, very hard at this time of the year to know with a lot of certainty what could happen or what you expect to happen. So I tread very, very lightly here coming out of the All-Star break, and then, of course, with the trade deadline as well, because you have a lot of player feelings in play. And a lot of times we think of these guys as robots. We think of them as machines. But they are still human beings, and there are a lot of considerations at this time of the year. So it is a challenge. It is something that is very difficult to handicap. There's a lot of gray area. And one of the things that we try to do in handicapping across all sports is we try to handicap out as much of the gray area as possible so we can make that most informed wager. We can try to eliminate as much variance as we can. I think at this time of the year, there's a lot of variance in the equation that we simply cannot handicap. We simply can't take it out of the picture. So I tread very lightly here in the second half of the month of July after the All-Star break. And the unfortunate thing here this year is that there's even more time. This was one of the earliest All-Star games in a while. 2017 was a pretty early one as well. But, most of the All-Star games have been later in the season than this. We have 20 days between when baseball starts again and the trade deadline. Usually it's more like 2 weeks. So we'll see how everything plays out here. But again, I think this is a very, very difficult time of the year for handicapping Major League Baseball. Something else you want to wonder about here coming out of the All-Star break, big division leaders. How do they come out of the break? Because they have significant margins for error. There's only one division lead under 5.5 games as play resumes tonight. It's in the National League Central, where all 5 teams are separated by 4.5 games, with the Cubs at the top, the Reds at the bottom, but the Reds, one of the biggest Pythagorean win-loss outliers in baseball, as I'll talk about here in a couple of minutes. How did those division leaders get back into the fray? Do the Astros have that incentive? Do they have that focus? Do they have that foot on the gas pedal? Do the Dodgers have that foot on the gas pedal with such a big lead in the National League West. What about the Yankees? The Yankees are such an interesting case because they had all sorts of injury problems in the first half, had a lot of guys step up and play a big role. Now a lot of those injured guys are back. So yes, you've got a fresh Yankees team, but do you have a fully invested Yankees team? That's the question. When you look at some of these big teams that are out there leading divisions, how do they come out of the break? Is this something that you want to approach like the month of April, where maybe you want to look to play some big dogs, wondering if those big favorites are engaged, are invested, are focused, are ready to get back to playing Major League Baseball when they know that they have 70 some odd games left to go, and they've already got this big margin for error. So that's a challenge here coming out of the All-Star break as well. And then finally, something else I kind of look at here, experienced teams, especially those that have underachieved. Is this a rallying point for them? We saw teams like the Indians, the Red Sox, the Nationals, the A's, they all got hot going into the All-Star break. And I think if you asked all of the players on those four teams, you asked the front offices, you asked the coaching staff, they will tell you that they were disappointed with how things went early in the season. And as they were going into the All-Star break, they stepped it up. Now, the Indians, of course, took advantage of a very, very weak schedule. You have to beat the teams that are on the sheet in front of you. But those are four teams that have made playoff pushes here recently. And obviously the Red Sox just won the World Series. Those are four teams that know what it takes. Those are veteran, experienced teams that started to make that push. Do they sustain that push now coming out of the All-Star break? Because these are very important games. Not only are you trying to gain ground going into the All-Star break, feel a little bit better about yourself and your chances, now the trade deadline is coming up. You want to prove to that front office, that you can do this if you get some help, or you can do this with the people that are in-house. So you wonder here about teams like the Indians, Red Sox, Nationals, Athletics, the Chicago Cubs even, who were very disappointing in the month of June. Do these teams go on runs? Because they understand, and these are teams that have their backs up against the wall. They don't have those big division leads like the Yankees, like the Astros, like the Dodgers have, and even the Braves to some extent. They can't rest on their laurels. They're still trying to make up ground. So those are teams that maybe you do want to look to buy coming out of the All-Star break here. Teams that maybe you expect to have that immediate level of focus. Teams that have been there and done that. Because when you look around at some of these division leaders, the Yankees really, they haven't been in this position as much over the last couple of years. The Astros have. The Astros know what margin for error they have. Maybe they're worried about the push for home field advantage, something like that, but they know what their margin for error is. The Dodgers, same thing. They know. But you look at the Braves, for example, in the National League East. Will they start to feel that pressure? Will they feel the Nationals breathing down their necks? Maybe the Phillies, if they get things turned around, although I'm not entirely sure that happens. But still, the Braves are a team not used to being in this position. The Minnesota Twins, same thing. It has been the Cleveland Indians division here for the last 4 or 5 years. The Twins have been an afterthought. It was them early in the 2010s and certainly throughout the 2000s, but they've been an afterthought. Are they a team that can withstand this pressure? And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the show with the Indians and Twins playing each other coming out of the break here this weekend in Cleveland. So I think that you have to ask a lot of questions that maybe we don't know the answers to. So I think coming out of the All-Star break, you do want to tread lightly. You do want to consider the full picture and all of the factors that are out there. So just some food for thought there as we come out of the All-Star break. I want to talk about some standings outliers. I think these are very important to take a look at here. I've also got a lot of thoughts on adjusted season win totals, but we will see probably some movement on some of these teams here early on in the second half. The Chicago White Sox are +6 in Pythagorean win-loss and also in base runs. They're a 42 and 44 team, but looking at them from a run differential standpoint, looking at them in that context-neutral environment with base runs, they're a 36-50 team. Do we see the markets fade the White Sox? Do we see the markets fade Lucas Giolito off of his first All-Star appearance? I think we could very well see that. I think the White Sox, are a team that right now you hope for Eloy Jimenez, Yoan Moncada to have big second halves, but they're not going to get that influx of talent from the minor leagues right now. Dylan Cease did make his debut in a doubleheader going into the All-Star break, but they are a team that I would be worried about. I think that +6 in Pythagorean win-loss is suggestive, is predictive of what their second half could look like, and I think that we do see the markets kind of follow suit there and feel the same way that I do. The Giants, 41-48 on the season, but they are +4 in Pythagorean win-loss, +5 in base runs. A lot of that has to do with how good they've been from a one-run record standpoint in the first half. Now, maybe that continues for the next 20 days, but they've got some relievers that will be on the move. They have some guys that will be traded, in particular closer Will Smith, who is probably the best trade asset of any relief pitcher out there, with the exception of Brad Hand, and I don't think the Indians are going to move Brad Hand. So the Giants are a team, as they start to dismantle that bullpen, and it probably will happen, they're a team I would expect to fall off. They'll likely trade Madison Bumgarner as well. Who knows if any of their position players will be on the move, but they are a fade candidate for me once those transactions start to happen. Right now, I don't know. They are one of those teams I talked about in the open where they've got a lot of guys on the trade block. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of anxiety in that clubhouse. And also, for the guys that will be staying around, there won't be a change in the front office, but there will be a change in the dugout. It will not be Bruce Bochy. So in the second half, you're playing for a lame duck manager. And Bochy has a lot of respect. The players have certainly appreciated what he's been able to do during his Giants tenure. I mean, they did win the World Series 3 times on his watch. But you wonder what the morale is like in that clubhouse. You wonder what the mindset and the mentality is in that clubhouse, and especially as guys start to get traded. And everybody in that room knows it's going to happen. But once it actually does happen, then what happens emotionally to that group? What happens mentally to that group? And just simply from a talent standpoint, who's still there? So the Giants, probably a fade team as we go forward, but I'm not so sure about them as a fade team here in the interim. The Yankees, Astros, Braves, Indians, Brewers, Padres, and Pirates, all +3 in Pythagorean win-loss. All of those teams have had a variety of different injury situations, except for really the Atlanta Braves. They've stayed pretty healthy throughout over the course of the season. The Padres have as well. But 4 of those 6 teams, they're dealing with a lot of injuries. I'm not so much worried about them and the fact that they're a little bit of an outlier in the Pythagorean win-loss department. Kansas City Royals, they are -7 in Pythagorean win-loss. They are a 30-61 team, but from a run differential standpoint, more like a 37-54 team. They are 6-16 in one-run games. I don't see that really changing at all. They will not be very active at the trade deadline. They don't have a lot of pieces to move. They don't have reasons to acquire a whole lot of pieces. I wouldn't expect them to do a whole lot unless they decide to do something earth-shattering and trade Whit Merrifield, but I don't really think that that's going to be the case. So the Royals here probably just will continue to be an underachiever as the season goes along here. Cincinnati Reds, -6 in Pythagorean win-loss. They are a team that a lot of people do like for a variety of different reasons. Very good pitching staff, underachieving offense here so far. They're a 41-46 team that is 4.5 games back in the Central. But again, from a run differential standpoint, they've played more like a 47-40 team. So I think the Reds will get some love coming out of the break, may get some love in the futures market, and I'll talk about them a little bit later on in the show here. The Arizona Diamondbacks, -5 in Pythagorean win-loss. They're 46-45 on the year, but 51-40 based on run differential. They are 13-19 in one-run games, so they've played a lot of very close games, which can have an impact on the run differential, obviously, if you've got a lot of blowouts one way or another, or if you play a lot of close games. 32 of their 91 here so far, one-run games. It's one of the highest totals of one-run games in Major League Baseball this year. So the Diamondbacks, possibly a positive regression candidate. but I'm not so sure. They kind of overachieved a lot offensively early on in the season. They've been a bit better offensively of late than they were for a long period of time in May and early June. But they're just a team that, I would have some reservations about expecting them to go off and reel off a bunch of victories. Toronto Blue Jays, -4 in Pythagorean win-loss, 34-57. By run differential, they're more of a 38-53 team. 7-14 in one-run games for them, but I don't like this team very much at all. I think offensively they do get better, but I don't think the pitching staff gets much better. And when they trade Marcus Stroman, likely trade Ken Giles as well, that's going to hurt them a lot because those are two of their best pitchers. So I think the Blue Jays will be an over team in the second half. I think they will play a lot of higher scoring games with that offense getting going a little bit, but also with some decreases on the pitching side. Finally, the Orioles and the Cubs, both -3 in Pythagorean win-loss. As we look at base runs here, once again, the Royals showing up, they're -7. The Tampa Bay Rays -6. The Rays are about 30 runs lower in run differential in terms of base runs versus actual run differential. So base runs really likes the Tampa Bay Rays. I'll talk about them here again in a minute, but there will be a lot of steam for the Rays here, I think, in the second half as the rotation gets healthy, as Tyler Glasnow comes back, as their bullpen gets a little bit healthier as well with guys like Alvarado coming back. I think that they're a team that people will gravitate towards in the second half as a positive regression candidate. So that's one I would definitely be on the lookout for. The Mariners are -5 in base runs, but a lot of that has to do with they're two extremes. They were very good early on, one of the best offenses in baseball. They've been awful ever since. I think that kind of skews the base runs metrics for them a little bit. Cubs, Diamondbacks, and Orioles, -4 in base runs. And you can find base runs over on the FanGraphs standings page. Some good information there to be had. Interestingly enough, the New York Yankees are +7 in base runs. And this is intriguing to me because they've had so many injuries. They're healthy now. And like I mentioned at the top, they're a very fresh team as well. So this is a team that you would think would be well-equipped for that push because they're getting some guys back from injuries that they had early on in the season. Base runs, though, sees them as a pretty big overachiever here for the first half. So I'll be very interested to see what happens with them going forward, and I have a very intriguing set of metrics to talk about here in a couple of minutes. The Phillies are +7 in base runs, and the Phillies are a team I've talked about a lot here of late. I thought they were a fade team for the most part in the month of July. I thought going into the break, they were in good shape against the Mets, who are just a complete outright disaster. But the Phillies have overachieved this season. And they're not a great team offensively. They're not great on the pitching side either. I think they are a fade team to some degree in the second half. We'll see how the market treats them. But outside of Aaron Nola, I've got a lot of worries about that rotation. And I think that the market will kind of follow suit there as well. The White Sox +6 in base runs, as I mentioned. The Rangers +5 in base runs. They're a team where offensively they really haven't been that good, but they've cashed in on a lot of their opportunities. So base runs, which takes sequencing out of the equation. It takes all of the outcomes as if there was nobody on base and then puts together a run differential with runs scored per game and runs allowed per game. The Rangers haven't generated a lot of opportunities, but when they have, they've cashed in on a very high percentage of those. So that's why the Rangers are a little bit of a negative regression candidate, and I do agree with that stance overall. I think Mike Minor is a regression candidate. I don't know if Lance Lynn carries a sub-3 the rest of the way, and I don't love the Rangers' bullpen either. So I do think they are a regression candidate here in the second half. Giants also +5 in base runs. Not a big surprise, as we mentioned. They do very well in one-run games. Also, the Indians +4 in base runs. How about third-order win percentage? This is a standings metric over at Baseball Prospectus. This is a projected win percentage based on some underlying statistics and the quality of opponents. This is more of a proprietary statistic for Baseball Prospectus. So when I say underlying stats, this does include things like base runs, stuff like that. But ultimately, I don't know exactly what the formula is. But what I do know is that this adjusts for strength of schedule and quality of opponents. So there are some very interesting things here to talk about with third-order win percentage. The Dodgers are minus 7.2. They should be 7.2 games better by third-order win percentage than they actually are. The Rays, 7 games better. So the Rays are beloved by base runs and third-order win percentage. So I do think, again, the Rays will be a team that regularly takes money here in the second half. The Cincinnati Reds, minus 5.3 wins per third-order win percentage. If you look according to third-order win percentage, the Reds should be in second place in the National League Central Division behind the Chicago Cubs. So the Reds are beloved by Pythagorean win-loss and third-order win percentage. So once again, a team pointing to positive regression. I think the market does fall in line with that assessment. The Cubs minus 5.2 in third-order win percentage. So by third-order win percentage, and really by base runs, the Cubs should have a commanding lead in the Central Division, and right now they don't. So that's one to watch, where the Cubs could be a team that kind of takes off in the second half. Plus 125 to win the Central makes some sense with them. And maybe if you wanted to throw a World Series future on them as well, because some of the predictive standings metrics that are out there do like the Chicago Cubs. Diamondbacks and Mariners, both minus 5.1 wins per third-order win percentage. So they should be 5 games better than they actually are. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I don't think the market would agree with that either. I don't think we see any love for the Diamondbacks or the Mariners really in the second half here. The Astros minus 4.3. They're just a dominant team. I'll talk about them here a little bit more in a few minutes. Now, the overachievers by third-order win percentage. The White Sox make another appearance. They are plus 8 games, according to third-order win percentage. So their record should be 8 games worse than it is, adjusting for those underlying stats and the quality of opponents. So the White Sox probably are a fade team here in the second half. And we do see that with their adjusted win totals, something I'll talk about here in a couple of minutes. The Phillies plus 7 by third-order win percentage should be 7 games worse than they are. Again, all of these standings metrics falling in line with the Phillies as a team performing better than they actually should. So that's something you want to keep in the back of your mind here as we go forward. The Yankees plus 6.5 games by third-order win percentage. So once again, third-order win percentage suggesting that the Yankees have overachieved, that they've been better than expected in some of those higher leverage situations. Giants plus 5.8, Indians plus 5.1. So base runs and third-order win percentage. Not a big fan of the Indians here as we go forward. Rangers plus 4.8, as I mentioned. A team that has gotten very lucky in those higher leverage situations. A team that has overperformed in those situations. So they're a regression candidate. The Braves plus 4.8, a regression candidate as well. And the Padres plus 4 games. So they could be in line for some tougher fortunes in the second half. Now, some interesting things here real quickly about third-order win percentage. If you use that, and again, what should be happening and what is actually happening, there are a lot of disagreements about this, because what should happen isn't always what's going to happen, and what happens isn't always what should happen. So do you take things at surface value, or do you take them with some of these alternative metrics in mind? Now, do I think that the Rays should be leading the AL East by 8.5 games? Absolutely not. Third-order win percentage suggests that the Rays are 7 games worse than they should be, and that the Yankees are 6.5 games better than they should be. That's a 13.5 game swing. That's probably a little bit excessive. But third-order win percentage does suggest that the Rays should be leading the AL East by 8.5 games. Base run says they're 6 games worse than they should be. So there is a lot of steam for the Rays to be better. Now, does that mean that the Yankees are inherently going to be worse? No, probably not. But what it does mean is that the Rays did underachieve in the first half relative to a lot of the metrics that are out there. So I do think that you do want to factor that into the equation, and you probably want to be on the Rays more than you want to be against the Rays here the rest of the way. Third-order win percentage says that the Twins should have an 11-game lead in the AL Central. Right now it's 5.5. Says that the Astros should be up 9. That's pretty much right about where they are. Says that the Braves should only be up 2 games on the Washington Nationals. So the Braves may be something of a regression candidate here in the second half, at least according to things like third order win percentage and base runs and Pythagorean win-loss. Now, whether or not that's the case, I don't know, but it's at least some food for thought. And again, the primary goal of the Bettor's Box here has always been to present information, sort of analyze it, and then let you decide what matters to you and what doesn't. In this case, do you think that the Braves have overachieved? Do you think that the Nationals should be closer to them? Well, if that's the case, maybe you fade the Braves in the second half and look to back the Nationals. By third order win percentage, the Cubs should be up 6 games, but on the Cincinnati Reds, who are currently in last place in the Central Division. And again, a lot of people do like the Reds quite a bit here in the second half. Then finally, third order win percentage says that the Dodgers should be up by 16 games in the National League West. Quite frankly, I'm not going to argue with that. They're pretty close to that anyway, and they are clearly the best team in the National League, quite possibly the best team in baseball. All right, let's look at adjusted season win total numbers. I'm pulling these from BetOnline as of this morning. We should see some more people dabble in these. They will start to move around a little bit. I will go by division here, telling you what the adjusted season win total is and what the team is on pace to do based on their current win percentage. So what I did was I took the number of remaining games, multiplied by the win percentage, and then added that total to how many games that team has already won. Is this a smart way to do it? Probably not, but there's a method to the madness here. There's a reason why I've calculated it this way and why I'm going to talk about it here on today's show. So the Baltimore Orioles, there's adjusted season win total 54.5, on pace for 49 wins. Boston, adjusted win total 90.5, on pace for 88 wins. No line for the Yankees as of when I wrote these down. They're on pace for 105 wins. No line for the Rays either, who are on pace for 93 wins. Toronto's adjusted season win total 66.5. They're on pace for 61 wins. The White Sox, 72.5, their adjusted season win total, on pace for 79 wins. I'll come back to them in a second because that's one of the biggest gaps out there with the adjusted season win total and the actual on pace number. Cleveland, 88.5, the adjusted number, on pace for 92 wins. Detroit adjusted to 58.5, on pace for 53 victories. Kansas City adjusted win total 60.5, on pace for 53 wins. No line for Minnesota, but they're on pace for 102 victories. Houston, 99.5 wins, on pace for 103. The Angels, 81.5 is their adjusted season win total. They're on pace for 80. Oakland, 84.5 wins is their adjusted total. They're on pace for 88. Seattle, 68.5, on pace for 67. Texas, 80.5, their adjusted number, on pace for 86. Then for the National League, Atlanta, 90.5 is their adjusted win total. They're on pace for 96. Miami, 63.5, the number, on pace for 61. The Mets, 77.5 is their adjusted win total, on pace for 72. The Phillies, 82.5, their adjusted number, on pace for 85. Washington, 86.5, on pace for 86. Chicago, 86.5, on pace for 85. Cincinnati, 77.5, on pace for 76. Milwaukee, 82.5, their adjusted season win total. They're on pace for 84 victories. Pittsburgh, 77.5 is their adjusted season win total, on pace for 80. The Cardinals, 81.5, on pace for 81. Arizona, 79.5, on pace for 82. Colorado, 81.5, on pace for 80. No line for the Dodgers, but they're on pace for 106 victories. San Diego, 80.5 is their adjusted number, on pace for 81. The Giants, 73.5, on pace for 75. Now, why are there some big disagreements between the adjusted season win total line and what teams are on pace for? Let's look at the Chicago White Sox as a primary example here. They're on pace for 79 wins. Their adjusted season win total is 72.5. How is that possible? Well, let's look. The White Sox, +6 in Pythagorean win-loss. The White Sox, +6 in base runs. The White Sox +8 in third order win percentage. So all three of those standings metrics suggest that the White Sox have overachieved dramatically in the first half. So are they really on pace for 79 wins? The answer is no. Their adjusted season win total of 72.5 takes into account the Pythagorean win-loss, the base runs, and the third order win percentage suggested or projected records. So if you think that the White Sox are 8 games better than they should be, as third order win percentage suggests, or 6 games better than they should be, as Pythagorean win-loss and base runs suggest, well, then they're a 36-50 team. 36 by 86, the number of games they played so far, is a 419 win percentage. With 76 games left, that gives them 31 more victories. With 42 wins so far, that puts them around 74 wins. It's actually 73.8. So if you look at, the Pythagorean win-loss win percentage multiplied by the number of games remaining, that's how you get some of these adjusted season win total odds. So my guess is, in looking at these and comparing the on pace to what the adjusted win total numbers are, that's probably what BetOnline did with these numbers. They looked at Pythagorean win-loss, looked at the win percentage, multiplied by the remaining number of games, and that's kind of how they got to their conclusion. So that's why we do have some outliers here, like a Toronto, 66.5. They're only on pace for 61 wins. Kansas City, 60.5. They're only on pace for 53 wins, but they're -7 in base runs and -7 in Pythagorean win-loss. They should be more like a 37-win team right now than a 30-win team. So that's why some of these numbers are off here. So the question that you have to ask yourself when looking at these adjusted season win totals, how much do I believe in the Pythagorean win-loss, in the base runs, in the third order win percentage numbers for these teams? And also, too, keep in mind, odds makers never want to get middled. They don't want to get middled on things like season win totals. Is it a big deal? No, probably not, because there's not a large handle for season win totals. But still, you don't want to get middled. So you're going to shade a little bit as well based on what your number was early on in the season. So factor that into the equation also. So they didn't pull these numbers out of their asses. They didn't come up with these out of nowhere. They didn't come up with the Mets at 77.5 when they're on pace for 72 because they think the Mets are suddenly going to figure it out. There's a method to the madness here. And what that method is to look at these alternative standings metrics and try to predict what will happen in the future as a result of them. So that's why you see Atlanta, who's on pace for 96 wins, at 90.5. They're plus 4.8 according to third order win percentage. And they're an overachiever in Pythagorean win-loss as well. So that's why you get some of these adjusted numbers that are out there. And that's how these season win totals have come to pass. So you've got to consider that when you're looking at these adjusted season win total numbers, that there are a lot of differences, that there are a lot of changes. And then you also want to factor into the equation the trade deadline. Do you really want to bet an over with a team like San Francisco? Their adjusted season win total is 73.5. They're on pace for 75 wins. When they're going to trade Madison Bumgarner, Will Smith, and who knows who else? What about Toronto? Yeah, I know their season win total adjusted 66.5. They're only on pace for 61 wins. And they're probably going to trade Marcus Stroman and Ken Giles at a minimum. They could move other guys as well. You've got to factor the trade deadline into the equation here. You look at a team, for example, like the Atlanta Braves. 90.5, their adjusted season win total, on pace for 96. They're already looking to go way over. They've got one of the best farm systems in Major League Baseball. They have currency to trade to get some pitching help in that rotation. They don't need any offensive help. They don't really need a whole lot of bullpen help. Maybe a reliable veteran arm and a setup capacity or something like that. They need starting pitching. They have the currency to get it. So you've got to factor that in. The trade deadline. Who's a buyer? Who is a seller? And when they sell, how much does it hurt them? When they buy, how much does it help them? So those are all things that you want to factor into the equation here for these adjusted season win total numbers. And then finally, schedule analysis. Schedule analysis is very important. Let's look, for example, at a few things here. National League West. How many times do you still play the Los Angeles Dodgers, who have the best record in baseball and are probably the best team in baseball? The Diamondbacks play them 7 times. The Rockies play them 9 times. The Padres have to play them 10 times. The Giants only play them 6 times. So if the Giants weren't selling off anything not nailed down, maybe they are an over candidate because they don't play the Dodgers as much as everybody else does. The Padres, 10 games left against the Dodgers, that's a lot. When you play against a team that is superior to you, that's a lot. How about the AL East here? The Yankees. The Orioles play the Yankees 7 times. Red Sox play them 12 times. Rays only play the Yankees 6 times. The Blue Jays play the Yankees 13 times the rest of the way. 13 times. How many of those games can the Jays realistically win? 3 or 4? Maybe 5? So you factor that into your season win total handicapping equation. The Rays only play the Yankees 6 times. The Rays are already a team that a lot of the standings metrics suggest should be better than they are. They only have 6 games left against the best team in their division. That's a big deal. That's a big positive for them. What about AL West teams? How many games do they have left against the Astros? How about this? The Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim play the Astros 14 more times. They play the best team in the AL, at least in my opinion, when healthy, 14 more times. That's a lot for the Angels. The A's play them 11 times, Mariners and Rangers both 9 times. You got to factor these things in. You have to look and see who is still left on the schedule for these teams. Look at the Indians, for example, here in the AL Central. They play the White Sox 7 times. The Twins, by comparison, play the White Sox 13 times. The White Sox are the 3rd best team in this division. Do those 6 games eventually matter for the Indians from a future standpoint? They play the Tigers and the Royals 20 times. Both teams do, the Indians and the Twins. The Indians and Twins play each other 13 times. So what does that mean to you from an adjusted season win total standpoint? What does that mean to you from a future standpoint with the division? The Marlins. The Marlins are a punching bag. They're on pace to win 60 games this year. How many times do you see, or they're on pace to win 61 games, excuse me. How many times do the teams in the the NL East play the Marlins? The Braves have 7. The Mets have 11. The Phillies, 6. The Nationals, 6. So those are games against a team that you should beat. What about games against the Orioles? The Red Sox play the Orioles 9 times. The Yankees only have 7 more against Baltimore. The Rays play 11 games against the Orioles. The Jays play 10. Look at that. The Rays play the fewest number of games of any division team against the Yankees and the most of any division team against the Orioles. They're a positive regression candidate anyway. Season win total over, futures, AL East, World Series. These are things that you want to factor into the equation here. You want to be able to look at the schedule, the situations for these teams, buyers and sellers, how much positive or negative regression is there in the standings metrics. Lots of different things, lots of different factors that go into the equation here. So with that in mind, some second half plays I'm looking at here. Atlanta over 90.5 wins. And I know that they're an overachiever from some of the adjusted standings metrics. I get that. I understand that. But I also think that they're a really good team, a great offense. The bullpen has improved as they've converted some starters back there. And they have the assets to get a starting pitcher because of a super deep farm system. The only threat to them is the Nationals. The Mets are a shit show. They're a complete and utter train wreck. And the Phillies have problems. So I like Atlanta over 90.5 wins here, adjusted win total for the second half. And again, they're on pace to win 96 games. And I understand some of the reservations about them, but I also think this team gets better in the second half with that young offense and also with some adjustments and some enhancements to that starting rotation. Angels under 81.5 wins. is another one I like here. I like this one quite a bit. Again, 14 of their remaining 71 games to be played against the Astros. And this is a pitching staff that didn't have much depth anyway. You add in the tragic passing of Tyler Skaggs, who was one of two pitchers who was worth at least 1.0 F-WAR, Fangraphs' calculation of WAR, going into the All-Star break. They're not a buyer. They've lost Tommy La Stella until probably at least September with the broken leg. Justin Upton, only 14 games with leg issues. Ohtani's a health question mark with the elbow ligament. Obviously, if anything happens to Mike Trout, they're not going anywhere in the second half. Albert Pujols has been a fairly pleasant surprise. He's an old man. They just don't have the pitching staff. They don't have the bullpen. They don't have the starting rotation. Again, 14 games left against Houston out of those 71 games. That's a lot. That is a substantial number of games against one of the best teams in baseball. So Angels under 81.5 wins. One of my second half plays here from a win total standpoint. And then also Mets under 77.5. And look, this is a team they're a shit show too. They're just a train wreck. It's a disaster. You've got the Mickey Callaway drama. The GM's getting involved. He's fighting with Callaway. He's been very vocal publicly. He didn't hire Mickey Callaway. And a lot of times GMs want their guys. It's like when a new athletic director takes over a college football program, that coach's ass is immediately burning. It's already on the hot seat. The new AD wants his guy. The new GM wants his guy. So Callaway's probably a lame duck. He's probably a dead man walking for that Mets team. Zach Wheeler could very well be moved. If they get a big offer for Noah Syndergaard, I think they have to entertain it, especially with all of his health questions. Edwin Diaz has fallen apart. The bullpen's awful. And they're going to face the Phillies, Braves, and Nationals a lot. And I think the Braves, and I just mentioned, they're a second half over team for me. Adjusted over 90.5. I like the Nationals. I've talked a lot about them here going to the All-Star break. I don't know if the Phillies figure it out, but the Phillies are a team that will be striving for the playoffs if they do. So there aren't many easy games for the Mets here. They do play the Marlins 11 times, but they've got so many problems, so much baggage with that team right now. I think under 77.5 for a team that's on pace to win 72 games. Even if they start to play a little bit better, improving your pace by 6 wins is a lot in the second half when you're as much of a mess as the Mets have been. So Mets under 77.5 to go along with Angels under 81.5 and Atlanta over 90.5. Got a couple of second half leans for you here as well. I lean to the Astros over 99.5. It's a big number. They're on pace for 103 wins. It's a very big number. This is kind of correlated in the sense that I don't like the Angels, and I also believe that the Rangers are a regression candidate as well. And certainly the adjusted standings metrics suggest that. So I do like the A's, I don't like the Angels, and I don't like the Rangers. So when I look at what's going on here with the Astros, George Springer only played 59 of 90 games in the first half. Jose Altuve only played 55 of 90. Carlos Correa only played 50 of 90. They've got pitching depth, but they're also interested in guys like Trevor Bauer if the Indians are a seller, Marcus Stroman. They're interested in Noah Syndergaard. They have the prospects to make the moves. They have the depth at the big league level to trade major league caliber talent to get some of these guys if they feel a little bit iffy with their starting rotation situation with Lance McCullers hurt, Colin McHugh hurt, and Brad Peacock working his way back. So the Astros over 99.5. It's a big number, but I think they're going to be chasing the Yankees for home field advantage. I think they'd love to chase down the Dodgers for the same thing. And also 3 of their best players played fewer than 60 games in the first half. So that's a lean for me with the Astros over 99.5. Also, the Padres under 80.5 is a lean. It's not a play. I know I've talked about this a lot and looking forward to betting their second half under. But look, the offense has woken up quite a bit for them here of late. Kind of tempers my thoughts some. They've done a good job protecting young pitchers. They've got the deepest farm system in baseball if they want to go out there and get some pieces and parts. But I do have some worries about what is a flawed team here. The bullpen showed cracks in the armor. The pitchers are all very young, reaching new innings thresholds at the big league level. I don't know how great they actually are offensively. So it is a lean. It's not nearly as strong as the Astros lean or as the 3 plays I've discussed. But I think the Padres will hit a rough patch here in the second half. So let's look at some futures here. And we'll start with the Indians plus 600 to win the division. Yes, I'm an Indians fan, full disclosure, no homerism here in this pick, though. The Twins are minus 1,000 at BetOnline right now. That implies a 91% probability that they win this division. But these two teams have 13 head-to-head meetings. I do still think the Twins win the Central. I do think they still hold off the Indians. But at plus 600, that's pretty decent value with 13 head-to-head meetings. If the Indians go, I don't know if this is going to be the case. I don't know how well they do in this head-to-head format here. But if they go 8-5, they pick up 3 games. They're 5.5 back. That cuts the deficit to 2.5. Anything can happen with 2.5 games. So if they go 8-5, and that's certainly plausible. I'm not even talking 9-4, where they make up 5 games. I'm talking 8-5, where they make up 3. All of a sudden, that race is much, much closer. Maybe there was some better value on the Indians at plus 900 a little bit ago, but I think it's still worthwhile here with the Indians cutting the gap down to 5.5 games. Plus 600 is not crazy. They obviously have to do well in those head-to-head meetings. They have to at least go 8-5 or better, I think. But still, plus 600 with 13 head-to-head games left and 70-some-odd games to go. Why not? Why not? Take that shot at plus 600. The Reds at plus 1,000 to win the National League Central. This is more of like a half-unit play. So basically a half unit to win plus 500 is sort of the way that you want to look at it here. They're only 4.5 back. Deep team, improving rotation and bullpen, and they dabbled in some Corey Kluber trade talks coming into the season. So they were serious about getting a frontline pitcher. I think Marcus Stroman is an ideal fit for the Cincinnati Reds. I don't know if they get him, but I think he's a phenomenal fit. Collectively at second, short, and third, they're plus 17 in defensive runs saved. They're plus 47 defensive runs saved for the season. So they're a great defensive team. Stroman is a ground ball guy. He fits. The park factor won't bother him. I think they've got a real legitimate chance. The Brewers have flaws. The Cardinals have been the worst offense, one of the worst offenses in baseball over the last 6 weeks. I think they've got a good chance. The Pirates, I don't know what kind of pieces they sell off. I think the Reds plus 1,000, you can do a lot worse than that with a team that's only 4.5 games back in the division, with a lot of head-to-head meetings and a lot of currency to trade if they're a buyer, and I think they certainly should be. As far as some World Series futures go, Rays plus 2,200 makes some sense. Again, third-order win percentage, base runs, Pythagorean win-loss, all point towards positive regression. Tyler Glasnow will be back. They'll get some guys back in the bullpen also. The Rays are a solid team. I think plus 2,200, when at worst, they're probably the home team for the wild card game. I think at plus 2,200, you've got some good margin there. You can obviously hedge in that wild card game if you want to, but I do like them plus 2,200 a little bit. The Indians at plus 2,500. Again, this just kind of falls in line with their chances of winning the division. And also, they could get to that wild card game. And they've got, if Carlos Carrasco comes back from leukemia, if Corey Kluber comes back from the broken arm, then they got 5 guys that could conceivably start in that game and be maybe a toss-up, from a betting odds standpoint. So plus 2,500, there's some equity there, I think. Yes, I'd be gun-shy off their last 2 plate appearances, or off their last 2 playoff appearances, because they're very likely, if they go to that wild card route, to run into the Yankees or the Astros. And even if they win the division, they'd run into one of those 2 teams in the first round. So that's clearly a challenge for them. But at plus 2,500, you've got some hedging margin on them, to say the least. Then obviously Reds plus 8,000. Some beer money on this one. If they win the division and you're live with plus 8,000 without that wild card game, that's a pretty good spot to be in. And hell, they could be right there for the wild card as well. None of the teams in that wild card hunt have really separated themselves. So the Reds at plus 8,000, they could get into that 1-game playoff, and you still have a good amount of hedging margin in that situation. And you'd probably want to use it because they'd run into the Dodgers in the first round if they had to go the wild card route. All right, so what am I looking at here for this weekend? As the grind of the regular season gets back into the fold here, Astros and Rangers start tonight. The only 4-game series here for this weekend that starts on Thursday, obviously. Framber Valdez and Lance Lynn on Thursday. Garrett Cole, Jesse Chavez Friday, Wade Miley, Mike Minor Saturday, Justin Verlander, Ariel Jurado on Sunday. Rangers offense was really poor going into the break. They were living on pitching, which is ironic for them. Do the Astros hit the ground running now that they're healthy? And look, what worries me tonight about the Astros, and I did take the Rangers for the first 5. Cole and Verlander go to the All-Star game. Springer, Bregman, and Brantley go to the All-Star game. Not a lot of downtime for some of their key personnel here. So in terms of this series, I'm a little bit worried about them. Not a Rangers fan for the long term, but not really looking to fade them here in this series either, as the Astros, have to get back into the mix with a big division lead, and also with, several of their key lineup guys having to go to Cleveland, not really getting a whole lot of downtime. It's a tough spot for the Astros, I think, in this first series. Couple of big series here, starting the second half. Nationals and Phillies being one of them. Nationals making up ground, the Phillies giving up ground. Strasburg, Pivetta on Friday, Corbin and Nola Saturday, Scherzer to be determined on Sunday. Aaron Nola white hot going into the All-Star break, absolutely dominant. The Phillies had a chance to regroup. Do they take it? The Nationals were hot. I don't think that they wanted to stop playing. A lot of times, you want the break when you're playing bad. You don't want the break when you're playing well. Nationals were playing very well. Phillies were not. So what happens here in this series? I think it's a big one for both teams, kind of a tone setter maybe for the second half. I don't know how much action I'll have on it, but I'll be watching it very closely to be sure. Pirates and the Cubs. This series not as big, but still intriguing. Archer and Darvish on Friday, Lyles and Lester Saturday, Williams and Katana on Sunday. I think there's a lot of pressure on the Cubs here. I don't think there's much pressure on the Pirates. Nobody expected much of the Pirates anyway. Offensively, they've been pretty good here over the last couple of months. I think the pressure is on the Cubs. Small lead, tight division. Cubs are underachieving. Joe Maddon's bitching and whining every single game. The Cubs should not be in this position. With all the money they've spent on the starting rotation and how good that offense is, they shouldn't be in this position. I think the pressure is on them here coming out of the All-Star break. Probably won't have much interest in this series, and certainly not on Friday with Archer and Darvish. But I think the pressure is on the Cubs. I'm curious to see how they handle it here over the first couple of weeks of the second half. Here's the big series, biggest in baseball this weekend, Twins and Indians. Enormous. Gibson, Clevenger Friday, Odorizzi, Bauer on Saturday, Barrios and Bieber on Sunday. The Indians are 5.5 back. They were 11 games back on June 15th. Which team has more pressure here? The Indians have been the face of the AL Central the last few years. The Twins are the newcomer on the block. The Twins are only 18-15 since the start of June. So they have leveled off quite a bit. What happens in this series? This is the biggest series of maybe of Terry Francona's tenure for the Indians, because they're the hunter now and not the hunted. They have to come out here, at least win 2 out of 3, preferably get that sweep. But that puts pressure on them. Do the Twins feel the pressure? Offensively, they've been so good here this year. What are they feeling? Are they feeling like this is a difficult spot for them? I don't know, but this is a big, 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 big series both ways coming out of the All-Star break. Obviously, I'm hoping the Indians figure it out. And certainly with what I just talked about with taking the Indians plus 600 for the division, if you do decide to go that route with me as well, you're certainly hoping for the Indians to play well this weekend. Dodgers and the Red Sox. Long trip east for the Dodgers here. They start with interleague play against Boston, and they get 3 lefties. I haven't seen the Dodgers rotation yet for this series, but it's Eduardo Rodriguez Friday, Chris Sale Saturday, David Price on Sunday for the Red Sox. Big series here for the Red Sox. I think that they have to feel like they saved themselves a little bit late in the first half. They did not start well this season. They got themselves into the thick of the wild card race and within striking distance to a degree in the division with a good push late in the first half. This is a big series for them as well. Not as big of a series for the Dodgers. So you wonder, will the Dodgers have that, that extra little bit that they need? But of course, this is a World Series rematch. So maybe that does keep them focused here. ESPN Sunday Night Baseball is this game. Dodgers stay east to play the Phillies. the Red Sox welcome the Toronto Blue Jays. Finally, one last thing I want to mention here. The Rays played, I think, 43 games in 44 days going into the break. Again, talked a lot about the Rays here on today's show as a team with a lot of positive regression signs in those alternate standings metrics. Do they make a big push? They certainly could. They get Baltimore to open up the second half. Would not be surprised if they pummel Baltimore here this weekend. Lots of to-be-determined pitchers. Teams will start announcing rotations today, so you certainly want to look and see who's pitching when, see what the layoffs are going to be for these guys on a game-by-game basis, stuff like that. Very important for you to factor that into the equation. We'll chat with Christian Pina on Friday about this weekend's UFC event. Monday, the Bettor's Box. Tuesday, Brian Blessing on the British Open. Then Wednesday, we'll do some stuff probably with college football. We'll see if it's Brad Powers or Ralph Michaels or Kyle Hunter or somebody like that. We'll probably be on all 5 days next week, assuming there's a UFC event. So we're going to really be ramping it up here on Bang the Book Radio, to say the least. Again, Adam at bangthebook.com for the notes. I talked about a lot of numbers today. Certainly in your best interest to get those. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. And remember that you'll never strike out when you're in the Bettor's Box.